Hello, everyone. My name is Nadine. I am a Washington State high school student, and I'm here working with Character Strong and the city of Kent to help provide families with some resources on how to cope and how to thrive in times like this. And I'm joined with Christine, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Christine Platt. I am an author, an advocate. I also work as the managing director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University, and really happy to be in conversation with you today.
Alrighty, all right. Let's start off with a nice icebreaker. So this is necessary for some reflection. So
Yeah.
when you were little, what did you want to be, and how different is that from what you're doing now?
When I was little, I actually wanted to be an author. And I am an author now. I know it's so wild, but I have to be honest and say it was not the pathway that I thought it would be on. So I've worked as a lawyer, I've worked as a policy advisor. Many different things have, I guess, aligned me to become the author that I've always wanted to be. But yeah, so it all works out in the end.
That's good. That's good to hear. All right, first question. What are two things that you've given the world that you are most proud of?
One thing for sure is the children's literature that I work on. So I write for early readers primarily, and I write diverse literature. So I write books that are considered windows and mirrors, right? So they are mirrors in that the children who are reading them, usually Black and brown children, are able to see themselves reflected on the page. And then also, they serve as windows for children who may be curious about other communities and cultures that they may be interested in. And I wish I was in my office because you would see all of the letters and just wonderful messages and pictures that I receive from kids. And so that's definitely one. And then I think the other one would be the first adult novel that I wrote and the only adult work that I have written, which is The Truth About Awiti, which spans the history of the transatlantic slave trade. So both of those books and all of my works really focus on the history and culture of the African diaspora. And that's something that I'm really proud of, just really proud that I've been able to get our stories out into the world, especially those stories that are lesser known.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. All right. So these past few months, I guess, almost a year, it's kind of crazy, have been, I was going to say a rocket ship, but maybe a roller coaster or a rocket ship of
Uh-huh.
just emotions going up and down. So I'm going to share with you a few fears that I personally have felt that I'm sure are shared by a lot of people. And then I want you to take the opportunity to share how you would recommend or how you personally respond to those fears.
Okay.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Perfect. Okay, so
Ready.
the first one is just very obvious isolation and like the fear
Mhm.
of being alone, whether it's physically, emotionally, or internally isolation. How do you cope? How do you handle that?
So it's interesting because writing in and of itself is normally a very isolating experience. And so I think, at least going into the pandemic, originally, I was super excited. I was like, I love solitude. This is going to be great, right? But then you realize that there's solitude by choice, and then there's like solitude that you feel that you don't have any control over. And I think for me, it's been well, there have been quite a few things that I've done that have been helpful. One is just making sure that I stay in touch with my friends and community, whether it's, via the phone, whether it's Zooming or, doing FaceTime. But also something that's been really fun is writing letters. And that has actually probably been one of the biggest surprises in terms of like dealing with isolation is like going to the mailbox and you're like, oh my God, you get this letter. And, it's been super fun. But yeah, I think making sure to stay engaged any way that you can. with the people who love and know you best is really helpful. And even online communities can be really helpful. So like I've really enjoyed sharing and connecting and even having those honest moments with my Instagram community, as I like to call them. And yeah, and so in those ways, I don't feel as isolated.
All right. All right, cool. Okay, so these next two fears kind of bundle up together. So it's the fear of like reflection or forced reflection and like feeling lost because oftentimes it's really hard to look at yourself like maybe not the prettiest parts of yourself and kind of analyze what parts are serving you and what parts aren't. And then when you dive into that self-reflection, you can often feel lost. And
Yeah.
so how do you deal with feeling lost and then also that uncomfortable inner reflection?
Yeah, I mean, I don't it's so interesting. I don't really look at it as like lost. So let me start with the first part. So early on in the pandemic, I had read an article about this really old man who lives on an island in Italy who lives in isolation. And this is like early on in the pandemic when it was still like, oh, this is only going to last, maybe a month, right? And so they were asking him for just like tips and advice on how to live in isolation. And one of the things that he said that really struck me was he said, this is going to be difficult for a lot of people. He said, because a lot of people don't want to look at themselves closely because they really don't like who they are or parts of who they are. And I just remember that like hitting me in my gut, right? And me thinking like, what are those parts of me that I don't really like, right? Like, what are those parts of me that I'm able to ignore or escape because I am going out with friends or I am doing X, Y, and Z, right? Like, what am I going to find out about myself, right? Doing this work. And so I think early on what it did was it forced me to sort of start to do some inner work and using the time more carefully, right? And being more conscious of this time. And I never really felt lost with some of the things that I found, but what I did feel was a sense of like, wow, I've been suppressing that for a while, right? Like I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. Or I might have said, this is an area that I know that I've needed to work on. And now I have the time and space to do it, right? And so like one of those areas is exercise. And I just remember like I couldn't escape it. I couldn't hide and run from it anymore, right? The mirror was right there all day, or like, my eating habits, all those different things, right? And so I think rather than saying lost, I think saying areas or parts of yourself that you need to explore more deeply, right? Because it's you. You can't be lost in you, right? You may need to uncover some things in you. You may need to deal with some things in you, but you can't be lost within yourself. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Beautiful. Oh, that was so beautiful. Thank you. All right, another one. So anxiety from not knowing. There's so much in the world that is uncertain or up in the air. And for a lot of people, including myself, that can cause anxiety, not knowing how to plan your future, not knowing what you're going to do the next day. So how do you kind of cope with that anxiety from the unknown?
Yeah. Now keep in mind, I'm a little older. So I've dealt with a lot of unknown in my life, right? And so I know that the unknown always eventually becomes known. Excuse me, but I do recognize that it is a real fear and concern, and we all have things that make us feel anxious in one way or another. And there are things that we can control, right? But then there are also things that we just cannot control. And I think it's in those moments where you find ways to engage in acts of self-care, what I call radical self-care, right? Because it's being like very intentional and purposeful in that moment. Like, I am doing this to get this anxiety under control. To me, that's like radical self-care. And whether that be journaling is really good. Sometimes it's helpful to just get the emotions and thoughts and feelings out. Aromatherapy is really, really good, right? And that could come in the fragrance of, maybe you're diffusing oils, maybe you're burning a candle, right? Some of your friends may have started businesses and different things, during this time. A lot of people are picking up hobbies. And one of my dear friends, she picked up the hobby of candle making. And so, finding myself in those moments where I feel anxious, not only burning a candle, but burning a candle by one of my friends, right? Just helps me just come back to the moment and be present in the moment and understand that there are just certain things that, are going to be unknown for a while, whether that be a short while, whether that be a long while. But again, the older me knows, just take a deep breath. Listen, everything that is unknown will become known, right? Or I tell myself, and I guess what I'm also saying too is use mantras to sort of help get you through some of these moments, right? Another thing that I like to say is, I know this moment feels permanent, but it's temporary. This too shall pass, right? And saying that as many times as I need to remind myself, there are moments in my past that felt insurmountable or made me so anxious. I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. I conquered that. I killed that. You know what I mean? So it's also just reminding yourself of some of the things that you've been through that before have made you anxious, and that, remembering that you came out on the other side, So that's my way of dealing with anxiety. And it shows up for everyone.
Mm-hmm. How would you recommend, this is a follow-up question to that, how would you recommend initiating that self-care when you have the added, I don't want to say stress or weight, but the added factor of people depending on you, whether that's extended family members or kids, or you've got to account for other people's lives while you're trying to take care of your own?
Yes, I know all about that. So I'm also a mama. My daughter is 17, and, the challenges of applying for colleges and not being able to do visits, and just the pandemic just made what was supposed to be just such an exciting, momentous time in her educational career just very different, and also very sad, right? I think it's important to honor and acknowledge those feelings, right? And say this is sad, or this is hard, or this is uncomfortable, right? And so I think what I do, obviously she is depending on me. I also care for my older mother, and just be very honest, right? And there are times when I say, I don't have anything to give right now, right? Or I say, I just don't have the bandwidth right now, but I will check back in with you later, and I'll see if I can help you with that, right? So I think the biggest thing is when you have people depending on you, and this took me a long time, Nadine, right? I was a person who would drive myself, just through the ringer, trying to do everything when I really didn't have the bandwidth, right? You have to be honest, right? And understand that you can't be everything to everyone all the time. It's so important. And I've never had anyone be angry or disappointed in me for being honest. You know what I'm saying? So that's how I would approach that. You have people that are depending on you, you got to be honest and say, I don't have the bandwidth for that right now. I am going to take a nice long bath, and then I'm going to burn a candle, have a little bit of reading I want to do. And so around 8:00, I'm going to give you a call and we can talk about this.
Yeah, beautiful. That brings us to our final question.
All right.
What is the number one piece of wisdom you'd like families to know, or you'd like to give families at this time?
I think there's so many things, but I guess this is either the number one or the top three, would be extend yourself some grace, right? I think parents, and I'm adding myself into that into that bucket, we're just trying to make everything right for our children. And we're trying to, just give them reassurances when we aren't necessarily reassured ourselves, right? But we think that we're saying the right thing and that we're doing the right thing. And I just want parents to extend themselves some grace. This is an unprecedented moment in history for so many of us, right? We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of a racial reckoning. We're in the midst of, a presidential, I don't even know the adjective that I want to use after that, right? But it's a lot going on, right? And so I think it's super important that parents extend themselves some grace and know that we're all just doing the very best that we can. And also just to remember, really, really, when we think of necessities and what our children need to survive and thrive, it's not, these constant reassurances or false reassurances from us. It's literally what most things need to survive, right? It's food, water, shelter, sunshine, and love, right? And so I think if you infuse those 5 things into no matter what is going on, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And you can, I think that there's a lot of pressure. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves and trying to make the moment seem something that it's not. And the reality is we're in the midst of a pandemic. It's, virtual schooling. It's a lot going on. And I just extend myself some grace. We're ordering pizza. I'm not cooking. Enjoy,
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that is the extent of my questions for today. Thank you again for your time and your boundless wisdom. I appreciate it. And I'm sure other people do who find it very helpful. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Nadine.
I have a final thought, Christine, which is as you navigate this next week where there's a lot going on and you got a big deadline, what scent are you burning at home right now?
So I have this scent that there are 2. Okay. So in the mornings, there's a scent by Vitruvi called Boost. And what it is it's a very citrusy scent, which is an uplifting scent. So it's almost like walking through, I would just say like orange blossoms. That's the only thing. It's just so beautiful and uplifting. And then in the evenings, when things become a little more hectic and stressful, I burn a scent by Woodlot that is Palo Santo and Rose. And it's just very peaceful and calming. And then at night, this is something I recommend for everyone. Just take some lavender oil, and I call them lavender bombs. And you just drop a few drops on your pillow and go to bed.
Nadine, what was the smell of this conversation for you?
The smell of this conversation. Is there anything like a sweet eucalyptus, maybe? Because eucalyptus is a very powerful, and it wakes you up.
Yeah.
This was kind of, but it's still really fresh. But this was a calm and sweet conversation. But I'm still getting kind of eucalyptus vibes. So maybe a softer, sweet eucalyptus.
I like that. I like it. I'm gonna mix some Boost and eucalyptus tomorrow morning, and I'll let you know how that works out.
Perfect. Please do.
You are the best.